I never should have told him I was his backup. Emily Harrison muttered under her breath as she stared at the empty street outside her small apartment. The rain came down in sheets, smearing the city lights into hazy streaks. She hated how familiar this feeling was, the crushing weight of regret. It was too late now. She couldn't undo the past. Not the hurtful words. Not the mistakes. And certainly not the choice she had made. She had always told herself she'd never be second, but here she was, waiting for the consequences. She hadn't meant to fall for Ryan Matthews. But she had, and now it was too late. She watched as her sister, Jessica, walked out the door, hand in hand with Ryan, their future in the making. Meanwhile, Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. She had known, deep down, that Ryan had always been drawn to Jessica. Her sister was everything Emily wasn't: graceful, poised, always the one who caught the eye. Emily had been content to fade into the background, but when Ryan had kissed her, she had hoped, just for a moment, that things could be different. But they weren't. Not anymore. As the days passed, Emily's world continued to unravel. She spent her nights working 2 jobs, trying to keep herself busy, trying not to think about how things could have been. But fate had a way of throwing curveballs. One fateful evening, after a late shift at the diner, Emily found herself walking home through the rain, her jacket clutched tightly around her as the wind howled through the empty streets. She was exhausted, both mentally and physically, when the sound of a car engine cut through the noise of the storm. Before she could react, the car screeched to a halt in front of her. The door swung open, and a man stepped out, his figure tall and imposing in the dim light. Emily froze, her heart racing as she instinctively took a step back. "Get in," the man commanded, his voice low, with a hint of authority that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't recognize him, but there was something about him, something dangerous in the way he moved. She opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off. "I'm not asking." His eyes locked onto hers, and Emily felt her resistance falter. She had no idea why she obeyed him, but she did. Without another word, she climbed into the car, feeling the weight of his gaze as he slid in beside her. The man, whose name she would soon learn was Damian Romano, didn't say much on the drive. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far beyond her understanding. He wasn't just any man. He wasn't just a stranger. He was part of a world she knew nothing about, a world of power, control, and danger. The moment the car came to a stop in front of a grand, imposing mansion, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't belong here. She wasn't meant to be here. But here she was, standing in front of the gates to a life she couldn't even begin to fathom. Damian didn't explain why he brought her here, didn't offer any comfort. He simply opened the door, gesturing for her to follow him. She did, too stunned to argue, too lost in the chaos of her emotions to question anything. Inside the mansion, the opulence was overwhelming. The marble floors gleamed under the soft light, and the walls were lined with paintings that probably cost more than everything Emily owned combined. She felt like an outsider, out of place in a world she never asked for. As Damian led her through the house, Emily couldn't help but wonder what he wanted from her. She had no answers, no explanation, but deep down, she knew she was about to find out. And it terrified her. But she couldn't turn back. Not anymore. "You're mine now," Damian's voice broke through the silence as they reached a set of double doors. His words were like a command, a statement of fact. Emily wanted to argue, to fight back, but there was something in his gaze that made her hesitate. His eyes were cold, calculating, and yet, there was a strange pull, something magnetic. She didn't understand it, but she knew she had no choice. She had made a choice. A choice that led her here. And now, there was no going back. The door to the mansion closed behind her with a soft click, and Emily stood there, frozen. The room was vast, decorated with rich velvet curtains and golden chandeliers that sparkled in the dim light. She felt small, insignificant, like a mere speck in this grand world. Damian stood beside her, his presence looming like a shadow. His silence made the air thick with tension, the kind of tension that made her heart race with uncertainty. This is where you'll stay, Damien finally spoke, his voice deep, controlled, sending a shiver down her spine. He gestured to the room with a sweep of his hand. The space felt suffocating in its luxury. I don't belong here, Emily thought, but she didn't dare speak the words out loud. Damien's cold gaze never left her as he led her through the sprawling halls. She followed, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if the house itself was drawing her deeper into its labyrinth. They passed by rooms that were more like palaces, each one filled with items that seemed far beyond her reach. She had never seen such wealth, never imagined a world like this existed. But then again, she had never imagined being caught in the web of a mafia boss either. This way, Damien's voice broke the silence again as he opened a door to a small study. He turned to face her. You'll be safe here. For now. Safe? The word hung in the air, but it felt hollow to Emily. How could she feel safe in a place where every shadow seemed to hold a secret, and every step she took felt like a trap closing in on her? You're not like the others, Damien continued, his tone softer now, but there was an edge to it. You don't belong in my world. But here you are. Emily wasn't sure if he was trying to convince himself or her. I didn't ask for this, she wanted to say, but she held her tongue. There was no point in fighting him. Not here. Not now. She had made a choice the moment she stepped into his car, the moment she had agreed to leave her old life behind. But it was a choice made out of desperation, out of fear for her family, not out of any desire to be part of his world. Damien moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't have to speak, he said, almost as if reading her mind. I know what you're thinking. His gaze flickered to the door. As if expecting someone. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. I'm just a pawn in his game, she thought, her chest tightening with the thought of being controlled. But as much as she wanted to escape, a part of her was drawn to him, to the raw power he exuded, to the way he commanded the space around him without saying a word. It was impossible to ignore. But I'm not staying here, she finally found her voice, though it was shaky. Damien didn't seem surprised by her defiance. You'll leave when I say so, he replied coolly. Until then, you'll follow the rules. Understand? Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. There was no escape. Not yet. Not while she was caught in this dangerous, intoxicating world he had pulled her into. She couldn't help but wonder how far she would go before she, too, became part of his world. Would she become like the others, caught in his web, obeying his every command? Or would she find a way out, a way to escape the power he held over her? But for now, there was only silence between them, broken only by the sound of their breathing. She had no answers, just questions, and the nagging feeling that she was already in too deep. Emily stood there in the grand hallway, the weight of Damien's words still heavy in her chest. The mansion, with its towering ceilings and gleaming marble floors, felt more like a gilded cage than a home. She wanted to leave, wanted to escape this suffocating life she had been thrust into, but the harsh reality of the situation kept her rooted in place. As Damien moved away, his voice lingered in the air. You'll follow the rules. Understand? She barely managed a nod. The fear inside her was not just from his power, but from the fact that she had no idea what he wanted from her. What was she supposed to do here? Was she just meant to be another pawn in his world? Emily walked slowly through the mansion, her footsteps echoing against the marble as she took in the opulence around her. The place was beautiful, but it felt like a distant dream, one that she had no right to be part of. She had never imagined being in a world like this. She had always worked hard to get by, scraping together enough money to pay the bills, never imagining she would be living in a place like this. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into a movie where she didn't belong. She passed by rooms filled with expensive furniture, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceilings, paintings worth more than she could ever fathom. Everything screamed wealth, power, and control. Everything screamed Damien. She had no idea how long she could stand it here. She didn't belong. As she reached the study, the same room Damien had led her to earlier, she hesitated before entering. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices inside. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. Damien was sitting behind a large desk, his expression unreadable as he spoke to a man in a black suit. Emily couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but she didn't need to. The presence of the man in the suit alone was enough to send a shiver down her spine. The world she had stepped into was dangerous, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Damien's world was not just about wealth and luxury. It was about power, control, and the kind of danger she had never known. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had made a choice, but now, standing in the middle of his mansion, she was beginning to question if it had been the right one. Could she really survive in this world? Would she ever be able to escape it? As if sensing her presence, Damien looked up from the desk. His piercing gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something more than just power. He said nothing but rose from his chair and walked toward her. "Come here," he commanded, his voice calm, yet firm. It was not a request. She could see it in his eyes, he was used to getting what he wanted. And right now, what he wanted was her compliance. Emily took a hesitant step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She was already in too deep. There was no turning back now. "You'll learn to trust me," he said softly as he reached out to touch her arm, his fingers brushing lightly against her skin. She flinched, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care. "In this world, you don't have a choice. But you'll learn to live with it." The words were cold, but there was something else behind them, something she couldn't quite place. Damien stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Rest for now," he added, his voice softer, but still commanding. "Tomorrow, we'll begin." Emily didn't know what to expect tomorrow, but she knew one thing for sure, her life had just changed forever. And there was no going back. Emily woke up to the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. She had hardly slept. The weight of the mansion's silence had kept her awake, but now, as the first light of morning peeked through the curtains, she realized something. She had never felt so alone in her life. She slowly sat up in the bed, the crisp sheets tangled around her, and looked around the lavish room. Everything here was different, too different from what she knew. The golden furniture, the tall windows, the large portrait of Damien's family hanging above the fireplace, it all seemed like a world she was never meant to be a part of. She had spent her whole life working hard to survive, to make it on her own. But now, in this foreign place, she was learning what it meant to rely on someone else, to live under the control of a man she barely knew. As she rose and moved toward the window, her thoughts raced. Damien had made it clear that she had no choice in this world, that she would live by his rules. But the question remained, how long could she stand it? Would she find a way to make peace with it, or would the pressure break her? Her reflection in the window caught her off guard. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the decisions she had made. She couldn't go back now. Not after everything. She glanced at the clock on the wall, realizing that Damien would likely expect her downstairs soon. The thought of seeing him again made her stomach twist. She still couldn't figure him out. His cold, commanding presence, the way he made it clear that he held all the power. But there was something else in him, too, something buried beneath the surface. Something she couldn't quite understand. She had caught glimpses of it, like when he had told her to trust him. His words had been firm, but there was a flicker of something softer there, something almost human. She shook her head. She couldn't afford to get lost in her thoughts about him. This wasn't about him. It was about survival. It was about figuring out how to get through this nightmare without losing herself. Emily quickly dressed, her movements automatic. She tried not to think about the way Damien had looked at her the night before, or how she had felt his eyes follow her across the room. The memory made her skin prickle with discomfort. When she arrived downstairs, the grand staircase seemed even more intimidating in the daylight. The house was silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs before stepping into the large dining room. Damien was already sitting at the head of the table, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. There was something about his presence that filled the room, made it impossible to ignore him. "Sit," he said without looking up, his voice as calm and controlled as ever. Emily sat down across from him, trying to remain composed, though she couldn't help but feel small under his gaze. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating, as he finally met her eyes. "You're settling in well, I hope?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. The question threw her off guard. Was this some sort of test? Was he pretending to care? Or was he actually trying to make her feel more comfortable? "It's fine," she said, her voice steady, though she couldn't hide the uncertainty in her tone. Damien studied her for a moment before nodding. "You'll have to learn how to navigate this world, Emily. There are rules here. And you'll follow them." His words sent a shiver down her spine, but there was no mistaking the authority in his voice. He wasn't asking. He was telling her. "And what if I don't?" she asked, her own voice rising with a bit more confidence than she intended. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression didn't change. "Then you'll find out what happens when people don't follow the rules." The room felt colder at his words, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily swallowed hard but didn't look away. "I'm not going to be a prisoner here," she said, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. Damien's gaze softened, just a fraction, but his voice remained firm. "No one said you were a prisoner. But you do need to understand one thing, you're mine now. And in my world, that means something." Emily's heart raced. There was something about the way he said it, something final, something she couldn't ignore. She had to survive this. She had no choice. But how long would it take before she got caught in his web, too? The days blended into one another, each one feeling like the last. Emily's life at the mansion was beginning to feel like a strange, suffocating routine. Damien's presence was constant, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. She couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. Every room in the mansion felt like it was watching her, judging her every move. She tried to keep to herself, focusing on the small tasks Damien had set for her. But the silence, the constant tension between them, was unbearable. He wasn't cruel, not in the way she expected. But he was firm, always maintaining control, always reminding her that she belonged to him. It was hard for Emily to admit, but she had started to notice small things, things she couldn't explain. The way Damien would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his voice would soften just slightly when he spoke to her, the way his gaze lingered on her for just a moment longer than it should have. It confused her. She had made it clear that she didn't want any part of this life. She didn't want to be here, trapped in a mansion full of power, wealth, and secrets. And yet, there were moments when she felt something else. A strange pull, something magnetic, that made it impossible to ignore him. She couldn't understand it. She couldn't allow herself to feel anything for him. Not when he had so much control over her life. But that didn't stop the quiet moments of doubt from creeping in. One morning, as Emily walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen, she overheard a conversation between Damien and one of his associates. She didn't mean to listen, but the words caught her attention. "She's not like the others," Damien said, his voice low but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "She's strong. She'll learn." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what he meant by it, but it felt like a promise. A dangerous one. As the days went on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Damien was watching her more closely. Not in an aggressive way, but in a way that made her feel both seen and invisible at the same time. He was always there, just behind her, just out of reach, like a constant reminder of her place in his world. And yet, there were times when his presence felt almost comforting, like a safety net she hadn't realized she needed. It was confusing, to say the least. The battle between wanting to escape and feeling drawn to him was taking its toll. Emily didn't know how much longer she could keep up the facade. She didn't know how much longer she could pretend that everything was fine, that she wasn't struggling to find her place in a world that wasn't hers. But then, one evening, everything changed. Damien asked her to join him for dinner. It was a simple invitation, one that felt almost casual, but Emily knew better. He wasn't asking. He was commanding. and she had no choice but to follow. As she sat across from him at the dinner table, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. She could feel his eyes on her, could feel the weight of his gaze, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Not now, not when the tension was so thick. But Damien wasn't the type to let things linger. "I know this is difficult for you," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily's heart skipped. She didn't know how to respond. "You're not used to this," he continued, his voice steady. "But you will be." His words were like a challenge, like a promise, but Emily wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever that meant. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tell him that she would never be a part of this world. But she stayed silent, unsure of what to say. Damien studied her for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't expect you to understand yet," he said finally. "But you will." His words sent a chill down her spine. Emily didn't know if she would ever understand him, but one thing was certain: her life was no longer her own. And there was no turning back now. The days dragged on, and with each passing moment, Emily felt the walls of the mansion closing in around her. She had grown accustomed to the silence that enveloped her, to the rhythm of her days, where her movements were careful, calculated. There was no room for error, not in this world. Not in Damien's world. Despite the power he held, despite the control he maintained over every aspect of her life, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than what met the eye. She wasn't sure if it was the subtle way he would look at her when he thought she wasn't watching, or the moments when his voice would soften just slightly. She had caught glimpses of it, those brief flashes of something human beneath the cold, calculated exterior. But those moments were fleeting, like a passing shadow, and she wasn't sure if they meant anything at all. One afternoon, as Emily sat in the garden, her fingers brushing against the cool stone of the fountain, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Damien's presence was like a storm on the horizon, always looming, always there. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice breaking the silence, pulling her out of her thoughts. Emily didn't respond immediately. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain the turmoil inside her? How could she put into words the way his presence both terrified and captivated her? Instead, she simply looked at him, waiting for him to say more. "It's not easy, is it?" he asked, his eyes locking onto hers. His tone was different this time, softer, almost as if he were trying to understand. "I know you didn't choose this life. But you're here now, Emily. And you're not leaving. Not unless I say so." The finality in his voice made her stomach churn, but there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Was it concern? Or was it just another form of control? She couldn't tell. "I never asked for any of this," Emily finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Damien replied, his gaze steady. "But sometimes, we don't get to choose. Life doesn't give us that luxury." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily wanted to argue, to say that she wasn't just a pawn in his game, but she knew better than to challenge him. Not here. Not now. Instead, she stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off her hands, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I don't belong here," she said, more to herself than to him. Damien's expression softened, but only for a moment. "No," he agreed, "you don't. But you will." The certainty in his voice made her heart race. She didn't want to be a part of his world. She didn't want to be molded into something she wasn't. But deep down, she knew he was right. She was already too far in. And no matter how hard she tried, there was no way out. Not without consequences. "I won't break you, Emily," Damien said, as if reading her mind. "But you'll learn to live with this. With me." Emily turned away, unable to look at him any longer. She needed space. She needed time to think. To figure out what to do next. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Damien was right behind her, always just a step away, always in control. She had no idea what he wanted from her. But she was beginning to fear that she would have no choice but to find out. Emily sat in the study, staring at the half-empty glass of water on the table in front of her. The mansion was eerily quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that she had started to grow accustomed to. It was no longer the suffocating, oppressive quiet that made her heart race, but a kind of uneasy calm, as though the air was holding its breath. She didn't know how to describe it, but she felt like she was walking a fine line. Damien had given her space in the last few days, allowing her some freedom, but it was a silence that carried weight. She wasn't free. Not really. There were still rules. And the rules weren't hers to make. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same question: how much longer could she live in this strange limbo? The world outside this mansion seemed so far away, like it belonged to someone else. Her old life felt like a distant memory, fading with each passing day. She had been so sure of herself once. So sure of who she was and what she wanted. But now, every step she took in this place felt like it led her further away from the person she used to be. Emily wasn't sure if it was the isolation or something more subtle, something hidden in the way Damien watched her, in the way he spoke to her, but she was starting to question everything. There was a part of her that wanted to leave. To run as far away as possible from this mansion, from Damien, from the life that was now forced upon her. But then there were those moments, the moments when she felt seen, truly seen, in a way she had never felt before. And that terrified her. It was more than just the control he had over her. It was the way his presence seemed to fill the room, demanding her attention without saying a word. And in those moments, she realized something. She was not as free as she thought. She was already caught in his web. The thought made her stomach churn, but it also made her heart race in a way she couldn't explain. Was she becoming attached to him? Was this some twisted form of dependency? Emily didn't want to acknowledge it, but deep down, she knew that a part of her had started to rely on him. She had started to trust him. Not completely, not in the way he expected, but in small ways. She trusted the way he took care of things, the way he handled situations that would have broken others. And in return, he had started to give her small glimpses of kindness, of something other than the cold, calculated Mafia boss she had first met. It was those glimpses that confused her the most. They made her wonder if he was something more than what he seemed. But just when Emily thought she had figured it out, just when she thought she could start making sense of her feelings, Damien did something unexpected. He invited her to join him for dinner. It was a simple invitation, but Emily knew better than to think it was anything less than another test. She wasn't sure why he was doing this, why he was offering her small moments of normalcy. Perhaps it was a way of keeping her in his control. Perhaps it was a way of testing her. Either way, she couldn't ignore the unsettling pull she felt toward him. As they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Emily couldn't help but notice how different this felt. The tension was still there, but it was quieter now, almost like a storm waiting to pass. Damien studied her, his eyes never leaving hers, as though waiting for her to say something. She wanted to ask him what all of this meant, why he was doing this, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she took a deep breath and forced a small smile. "Thank you for the dinner," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. Damien didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her, as though weighing her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "You'll get used to this," he said, his gaze steady. "You'll learn to understand." Emily wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his eyes made her feel like she was on the edge of something she couldn't control. She had started to trust him, but she was starting to realize that trust was a dangerous thing. She didn't know what Damien wanted from her, or what he expected her to become. But one thing was clear: her life would never be the same. And the more time she spent here, the harder it would be to remember who she was before. As the night wore on, the unease grew stronger. Damien's words lingered in her mind, the weight of them settling heavily in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever came next, but she knew that there was no going back. The world she once knew had already slipped away, and there was no telling how far Damien would go to keep her in his world. Emily stood in the hallway, her hand resting on the railing of the grand staircase, staring down at the empty space below. The mansion was quiet, as it had been for days, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was growing louder. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in around her, reminding her that she was here by choice, or at least, by the choice she had made when she stepped into Damien's world. She had tried to ignore it, tried to pretend that she wasn't being pulled deeper into the web, but every day brought something new. Damien's presence was everywhere, a constant reminder of her place in this world. She had no real control over anything anymore. The first time she had tried to resist, she had failed. Damien had a way of making her feel both invisible and the center of everything at once. His eyes always seemed to be on her, watching her every move, even when he wasn't physically present. It made her uneasy. She had expected to be angry, to feel trapped, but instead, there were moments when she couldn't deny that a part of her felt something else, a strange, unexplainable connection to him. He wasn't the cold, distant figure she had first assumed. There was more to him, something she couldn't understand, and the more time she spent around him, the harder it became to push those feelings away. She wasn't sure if it was because she was slowly starting to trust him or because she was slowly becoming a part of his world, but it made her question everything. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't asked for any of it, but here she was. And no matter how hard she tried to deny it, she knew there was no going back. She couldn't undo the choices she had made. She couldn't change what had already happened. But she could still fight for herself. She had to. Just when she thought she had everything figured out, just when she had convinced herself that she could navigate this world without getting too tangled in it, Damien made another move. This time, it wasn't a command. It was an invitation. He asked her to meet him in his private study. Her heart skipped a beat at the thought of being alone with him. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but she knew better than to refuse. As she walked into the study, she found him standing by the window, looking out over the city. The soft glow of the lights outside painted his features in a way that made him look even more untouchable. When he turned to face her, his eyes were unreadable, but there was something in them, something that made her pause, something that made her heart race even faster. "You're still adjusting," he said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge of something else. "But you'll be fine. You'll get used to this." Emily didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. "Do you think I'll ever be able to leave?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "You won't want to leave," he said, his voice low and steady. Emily could feel the weight of his words, even though they were so simple. The way he said it made her question everything she thought she knew. How could he be so sure? Was he manipulating her, or was he telling the truth? "You're part of this now," Damien continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "There's no going back from here." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was no use. She could feel the pull, feel herself being drawn deeper into his world, and despite everything, she couldn't stop it. She had no choice but to follow. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Damien's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I already told you," he said. "You belong here now. And that means you're mine." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had heard him say it before, but this time, it felt different. It felt final. There was no escaping it. She was trapped in his world now, whether she liked it or not. Emily stood in the middle of the room, her heart racing as Damien's words echoed in her mind. "You're mine." She had heard them before, but this time, they felt different. There was no denying it now. She was a part of his world, a world that wasn't hers, and she had no way of escaping it. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest, suffocating her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure how to breathe. She had tried to convince herself that she was still in control, that she could find a way out. But the longer she stayed here, the harder it became to hold on to that belief. Her life had become a strange mix of emotions, a constant battle between fear and something she couldn't explain. She didn't want to admit it, but there were moments, those rare, fleeting moments, when she felt something other than fear. It was confusing, terrifying, but it was real. She couldn't ignore it. Damien's presence was overwhelming, But there was something else there, something she hadn't expected. There was care in the way he looked at her sometimes, a softness in his voice when he spoke to her. It made no sense. He was cold, calculating, and yet there were times when she could almost believe he was more than that. But those moments were few and far between. The rest of the time, he was distant, unreadable. She had no idea what he wanted from her, or if he even wanted anything at all. "You'll learn to live with this," he had told her, and she had no choice but to believe him. He was right. She would learn. She had no other choice. But as the days went by, Emily began to realize something else. She was no longer just surviving in this world, she was becoming a part of it. She was starting to understand the rules. She was starting to see things from Damien's perspective. The house, the people, the power, it was all beginning to make sense in a way that terrified her. She was becoming like the others. The thought made her stomach churn, but it was the truth. She had to admit it to herself. She had no control here. Damien had made sure of that. And somewhere deep down, she knew she had started to rely on him. The thought scared her more than anything else. She had never needed anyone before. But now, in this place, in this world, she couldn't deny it. She needed him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. It was that realization that kept her up at night, her mind racing with thoughts of what would happen next. What would Damien expect of her? What did he want from her? Would she ever be able to leave? She didn't know the answers. But she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. The door had been closed, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open it again. She was in this world, and it was changing her. There was no way to stop it. The silence in the room grew heavier as Damien approached her, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. She could feel his eyes on her, his presence surrounding her like a storm. She had no escape. Not from him. Not from this. She could only brace herself for what was to come. And when he spoke, his voice was soft but commanding. "You've come a long way, Emily," he said, his tone making her heart skip a beat. "But there's still so much more to learn." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever came next. But she knew one thing, there was no turning back.